And now back to 80/20 estate planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
We're back after the first half hour of this 13-part series, and a good first half hour it was. We were in the midst of a conversation, and I want to come back to David Freeze. And Dave, pick it up where we left off and some of your thoughts.
Well, one of the directions we were going out is when we talk about 80/20 planning, clearly there's a sense of an imperative in there. Let's go and get some planning done so that things are going to be the way you want them. Because the bottom line is, if you don't do the planning, the government of your state will step in with its Intestate Act and will say where your assets go. Or if you don't really think these things out, you may have documents or you may have your assets structured in a way that's not advantageous.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. An example would be, even if people have good documents that take advantage of some federal tax credits that are available to them, frequently, in order to take advantage of that, the husband and wife need to have some assets in their own names. And a lot of times we see people pass away where all the assets are held jointly, or all the assets are in the wife's name and the husband passes away first. And so even though they had good documents, we lose the tax credits, we lose the big advantage for the kids because they didn't take the time to make their documents match up and make their assets match up with the plan, what they thought about. So there's a couple of things going on. One is you want to get into this process and get something the way you want it rather than the government. But then, two, you need to take the time to structure your assets the right way. This also means you need to share information about your personal finances with your trust and estate planning team. And that means having faith and confidence in them that they'll be treated confidentially. But if you don't do it, you run into a problem. And another example of that would be frequently, Mom will come to me and she'll say, I want all three of my children to get my assets equally. And that's what her will says. But then when we talk to her about her assets, we find out that her house is titled jointly with her daughter, and a bank account is titled jointly with her son. Those will transfer to those children.
Good point.
Furthermore, the taxes will be paid by the other child's share. And so you need to focus on the plan and how the documents integrate with the plan and how you hold your assets.
So what you're saying is it didn't match up with the way we thought we wanted it to match up.
Frequently. I mean,
right.
I would say a full 75% of the time when people come to see me, their plan would not work the way they thought it was going.
Michael, same experience?
Yeah, well, the thing that I have to educate, pound into my clients' heads, is that estate planning is a process, not an event. You can go to estate planners, and there's any number of guys in town here that can do credit sheltered marital deduction trust, but they just pull them out of their computer and plug in the names. And I tell my clients, well, if you went into a store to buy a suit, the guy and the salesman says, well, that's fine. Here, I've got a 44 long. And you say, well, wait a minute, I wear a 40 long. Well, that's okay. I've got a 44 long. Well, that's what you get in estate planning sometimes. Or you get done with your plan, and you think, all right, I've got these. How much does it cost to get a trust done? Clients ask me, and I say, well, I don't charge anything to do trusts. And they're a little incredulous. I say, I charge for designing and planning estates. The documents have to fit the design and the plan. That comes with the design and the plan. And you have to keep them up. You wouldn't buy a car and say, well, I'm going to save a lot of money. I'm never going to do a grease job and oil change. Well, that's ludicrous.
Michael, let me stop you here. This is a very important point. I think what you're saying, and maybe this isn't technically the case, but certainly conceptually it is, you're giving away the trust, but you're charging for the wisdom and the interaction and the experience that you have to make sure that people get what they want.
That's where my value is. That's where my value is.
Okay.
Al, I would add to that I frequently tell people that the artistry in what I do is in making very minor changes in many cases in the documents. It's helping them to find out what they want, and then making sure that the documents, accomplish that, and that they follow the plan so that their assets are structured properly too. I'm with Michael on that really what you're doing is helping people plan, and documents are ancillary.
That is a huge issue and one that we will deal with in the rest of the series. Let's move on here. Our time is getting limited. who should do estate planning? Often, so often, especially in the estate tax debate today, we think it's the rich people, the high net worth people. It sounds to me that what you two have described today applies to a whole lot of other people than just those.
Sure. I mean, I'm a firm believer that anybody should do it. I have people say to me, "Oh, I'll come and see you when I have enough money to do an estate plan," and you know, that's sort of silly, especially if you have children. If you have children, it's irresponsible. I don't mind saying it. It's irresponsible not to decide who their physical guardian should be if something happens to you, and who manages the money, and what the rules are, and what you want them to have. I mean, that's how you're going to pass on your values if you're not there to do it yourself. And so I think that's just irresponsible.
And what you said was, if the client doesn't get that in writing, then the state does it.
Yes,
is that pretty true throughout the country?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's very true. And the state, the funny thing about state law, Michigan, for example, and many other states, they turn the money over to the children when they're 18 years old. Now, I have had maybe out of 7,000 trust clients, 2, maybe 3 give money to children when they're 18 years old. And so why would you want the law to dictate how your estate's distributed?
So then, by choice, when that money does get turned over at age 18, it's just sort of happened by default and by the state laws taking over when people have died without wills and trusts and so forth.
Correct.
Okay. So are you in agreement then that there are different levels of estate planning that are appropriate for different levels of net worth and complexity and entities that are involved? So a family with a business has different issues than a family that doesn't have a business. So it's all estate planning. It's just done at different levels. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's why it's estate planning, not document preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And I like David's description of artistry. I can hardly write legibly. I certainly can't draw pictures, but it is an artistry. It's an art to do estate planning.
Okay. We would like to talk about some of the goals of estate planning then. We've talked about values. I guess I'm interested in some of the expressions or what some of those goals are and maybe how we get to those goals. Now, some that I've thought about or that I hear about in estate planning, I hear about control, that people who have some assets to pass would like some control of those assets, certainly while they're alive, and sometimes beyond the grave. Yet, estate taxes seem to prevent control in so many cases, or at least we're sort of led to believe that. It looks like we look for asset protection against creditors and so forth. Flexibility is important. What else? What do you guys see that's important?
Well, Al, I take my clients through a series of questions. When they come in, I always ask them, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
And
so sort of back to what Dave was saying.
Yeah, and invariably, they will not know why they're here, because they'll say, I want to avoid taxes and I want to avoid probate. Mm-hmm. And I say to them, are those the most important things to you? And they say yes. And I said, okay, I'm going to show you right now. Those are the 2 least important things to you.
Well, this is something then that we all need to hear. I know we're going to go to a break in a minute or so here. So I think, Mike, do you have a series of questions?
Yeah.
Is that what you do?
Yeah, I go through a series of 4 or 5 questions.
Well, then let's go on a little bit further, but let's hold off on those questions until after the break. In the next segment, we're going to do those questions because I'm very anxious to hear those. What are some of the other goals you see, Dave, that come up in estate planning?
Well, I see as many different goals as people that come to see me, but you can obviously group them into some broad categories. And one of the goals, for example, if you have minor children, is often and should be to provide for their physical care and upbringing in the event you're not around to do it. And that's the selection of a physical guardian. But you really have to couple that. You put together a team for the child, because frequently you should have someone else managing the money. And you should set up rules for how and when that money gets used. And a lot of times, again, the documents that Michael and I prepare are somewhat technical because you do want them to comply with tax laws and you do want them to comply with local laws regarding trusts. And you just need to be aware that you get to make those rules up.
Okay, and are we talking about guardians and executors and trustees and all those complicated words?
Exactly.
And we're going to handle those later in the series. Let's take a break, and I want to come back with those questions, Mike, and see how you get your clients to focus.
Great.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940 or email algibbons@algibbons.com.
Money. It's just not what it used to be. Among other things, it's younger. But new money and old money have at least one thing in common. Phoenix, a company that's been helping people manage wealth for nearly 150 years. Phoenix understands that making money and knowing what to do with it are two very different skills. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com. We could bring harmony to your life, if not to your music.
Are you interested in herbal remedies, New Age healing, and spiritualism? Are you looking for alternative methods to increase the health of your mind, body, and spirit? Now you can find it all in the eclectic and informative book, The Ultimate Deceit of the Human Race, by Ezra Shem and published by Anath Publishing Company. Get on the fast track to knowledge today by calling 1-800-363-0799 or contact Ezra at ezra@comtech.com. The survival of humanity depends on its knowledge of self. That's why it's important to study all origins of our belief systems. So expand your horizons today and pick up The Ultimate Deceit of the Human Race by Ezra Shem and learn more about your inner being. Call 1-800-363-0799 or contact her on the web at ezra@comtech.com and find out how self-knowledge can get you further today. Tune in to ALE every Saturday afternoon from 1 till 2 and join BJ, the Cyber DJ, on Cyber On America. Joe Chismerick, your host, will be discussing the Internet and its social ramifications. From doing business on the Internet to the dangers of the Internet, Joe and his great guests will discuss it all. So don't miss Cyber On America every Saturday afternoon from 1 o'clock till 2, right here on WALE Renaissance Radio.
And now back to 80/20 Estate Planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back. Mike, I really am looking forward to these questions. People come in, they say, I want, as David said, I want to avoid probate or I don't want to pay any taxes, and yet you need to find out, as we said right at the top of the show, what do they really want? How do you do that?
Well, I challenge them that those two things are the least important reasons for them being in my office, and they're going to agree with me.
Probate and taxes?
Yes.
Okay.
Then I get their attention. And I take them through a series of questions that I have a PANA board that I use, and I write these down. I write down control of assets, and then I ask them this. If you could give up control of your assets to the government and let them control them like they do your Social Security fund and avoid estate tax when you die, or you could control your assets but have to pay some, which would you do? They pick control.
Mm-hmm.
And I say to them, if you could if you're disabled, by court definition, have the probate court take over. Your spouse or your relatives have to report everything to the probate court. It's all a public record. There's taxes involved, but it's all public, and you have the court controlling your assets if you're disabled and controlling when you're disabled. But you didn't have to pay any estate tax when you died, or if you could privately make arrangements for when you're declared to be disabled, who does that, who takes over your funds, how you're cared for and your family's cared for, and it's all private, no public record, but you'd have to pay some estate tax. Which would you pick? And they pick, well, I want to control. Well, if you, when you die, could let the state determine where your assets go and when they get there, or you could control what happens to your assets when you die, you could protect them for your spouse, your children if they have shaky marriages, bad spending habits, drug or alcohol problems, disability after you die. If you could do that and pay some taxes, or let the state take care of things and not pay taxes, which would you pick? And they pick, well, I want to control those. Well, how about this? When you die, and I usually talk to the husbands because 11 out of 12 surviving spouses are female. So now, if you're dead, the joint property protections you have in some states go away from lawsuit. Now, your spouse gets your insurance, gets all the real estate, gets the stock accounts. Now, if she slides through a stop sign on an icy morning and hits a carload of kids on the way to school and 2 or 3 of them die, there's no car insurance in the world that'll cover that. Her assets are totally unprotected. Now, if you could leave it like that and not have to pay any estate tax, or if you could set those assets up so your wife is veritably suit-proof, no one can sue her after you die, and you know those assets will be protected for her, but you have to pay some estate tax when you die, which would you pick? And they say, well, I want to protect the assets. Remarriage, and this is where I get into some things about, okay, you die, husband, now your wife remarries. It's really worse if the wife dies and the husband remarries, I've found. I go through the statutory elections against wills. If you do a will and leave the spouse nothing, the new spouse can take a lot of things. But here's the problem I've had. I have trusts for clients. Husband dies, wife remarries. Over a period of years with the new spouse, they put assets in joint name, not thinking about it. They die. The new spouse has all the assets, puts them in joint name with her kids, and whammo, the trust is no good. How do you protect against that? And if you could protect against that, make it impossible for that to happen, and pay some tax, or let that go ahead and happen and not pay any tax, which would you pick? And they always pick, I want control and protection. And I tell them, now wait a minute. You've said to me, controlling assets while you're alive, if you're disabled after you die, protecting assets for your spouse, and against remarriage problems, they're all more important than federal estate tax and probate. That's the least important thing to you. And they're convinced. Now we can talk about estate planning.
Mike, let me ask you a question. Is that always the choice? Is it always a choice about paying some estate taxes or having all these problems? Or is there a way for people to do you make it sound worse than it is?
No.
Is there a way for people to retain some control and still avoid estate tax?
It's interesting because I tell them, here's the good news. We can do all those things I just listed and still avoid probate and federal estate tax. So you don't have to give up avoiding federal estate tax. My point is to show them that's the least important thing to them.
Right. Dave, comments?
No, I would agree. I think that there's a notion out there, for example, that if the federal government does away with federal estate taxes, that the need to do planning goes away. But the reality is, my practice, like in Mike's, and I work with people that have a few $100,000 up to people that have hundreds of millions of dollars. The reality is that for all of those people, if they had to choose between tax savings and control, they'd take control and they'd pay taxes. The good news, like Mike said, is that if you do it right, you can get both.
Dave, let me stop you right there.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it right, and I just want to put in a quick plug, I believe it's very important to deal with people who specialize in this area. You don't get the local lawyer in general practice to handle these kind of issues in a state-of-the-art. That's my experience.
Well, the other thing from a consumer standpoint that a lot of my clients have trouble with is in most states, and my clients come from many different states where we use local counsel to review the plan, the document part of the plan. But in almost all the states, there are not specialties. Like if I break my arm, I know I could go to a board-certified orthopedic surgeon that's proven his or her ability by taking an exam in that specialty. Not true of lawyers. In fact, in most states, they're not even ethically allowed to say, I specialize in this area. So it makes it harder for people to figure out who really knows what they're doing.
Right. I want to come back. We're going to take another break. I do want to come back, and I want to talk, Dave, follow up on this issue of what is the likelihood of a state tax repeal or reform, and how will it affect estate planning? Does it mean we don't have to do it anymore? Let's come back right after the break and talk about some of those things.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes. From A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940 or email algibbons@algibbons.com.
Today's money. It's not just who you are, it's what you're made of. It's not just having a name, it's making one. Not just being, but creating. In fact, 8 out of 10 today's millionaires aren't inheriting their money, they're earning it. That's not just evolution, that's revolution. And one company understands how money has changed, and that company is Phoenix. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com, because money is not what it used to be.
Go to the gym. Become a problem solver. Become a force of nature.
Lower your blood pressure.
Raise your expectations. Realize how truly, truly lucky you are.
Redecorate your office.
Take 6 months off to travel. Write your own Declaration of Independence and live it. Work for a nonprofit and profit from your work. Understand that the world is of your own making. Understand the difference between ambition and greed. Forget the buzzwords. Talk like a human being. Leave the planet different than you found it. Make your own hours, make your own dreams. Remember to put toner in the copy machine. Forget about the gross national product. Love your job. Repeat, love your job.
Optimism is a weapon. HotJobs.com. Onward, upward. At HotJobs.com, you'll find new job listings every day. You can search by city and by industry. The bottom line, HotJobs is the most direct link between you and managers from thousands of great companies. Find the jobs you deserve at HotJobs.com. Onward, upward.
Warning, the following message is for teens only.
Fasten your seatbelts. Make sure your tray tables are in their full upright and locked position, and get ready for Teen Talk every Saturday night from 6 to 8 p.m. Your host, Sean, and his guests will take you on a 2-hour ride through adolescence, discussing anything and everything a teenager in the new millennium would dream of talking about. Music, current events, high school issues of the day, and more. Teen Talk is interesting and outrageous at the same time, so tune in Saturday nights at 6 and join Sean and his gang on Teen Talk right here on 990 WALE.
You're listening to Southern New England's Talk Alternative, offering the most unique program, 990 WALE, Renaissance Radio.
And now back to 80/20 Estate Planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
And we're back for the final segment with Mike Thomas and Dave Fries. I'm your host, Al Gibbons. And we ended the last segment talking about the possibility of estate tax repeal or reform and its impact on estate planning. Dave, what do you think?
Well, if you had asked me before the election, and a lot of clients did, I said that I thought that realistic major reform was unlikely, but this thing has developed a life of its own. Everybody that I know in Washington whose opinion I respect on this is saying that, you know, the Republicans have sworn to try to do it. The Democratic Party doesn't want to be perceived as bucking it, and it has really developed. You'd think that that George Bush won with a Ronald Reagan-style landslide the way it's going. So I think that there is a likelihood now, greater than ever before, that we could have some kind of phased-in repeal. Certainly we're going to see a dramatic increase. You know, the unified credit, the amount you can shelter is $675 now. It's creeping up to $1 million by 2006. I think we're going to see an acceleration of that and an increase, at the very least, to probably $2 million per person. And that makes a lot of people think they don't need to do anything.
Which is not true.
Why not, Mike?
Because estate taxes and probate avoidance are the least important elements of estate planning. And that's the danger, and Dave and I were talking about this at the break, of course. The danger is that clients are going to think, I don't have to do anything now. I don't have any taxes to pay, and they will never get in the door, never be educated as to the important things of planning, passing on their value system to their kids, again, which we haven't mentioned that much, but that's very, very important. And it's really incumbent upon estate planners, insurance professionals, financial advisors, and CPAs to be educating their clients that the real importance is not the estate tax. You have to get planning done.
Well, Mike, as you said at the top of the show when we talked about definitions of estate planning, it still comes down to giving what we have to whom we want, the way we want, and when we want. And while we said we wanted to save every last tax dollar, it might be good news we may not have tax dollars that we need to save, but we still need to pass assets and we need to pass values.
Sure.
And it certainly seems to me that if there, and I believe there will be reform. I don't think we're going to see outright repeal. And the danger is, as I talk to attorneys and accountants and trust officers throughout the country, the danger is that clients will believe that there is no urgency. And yet I'm reminded of the saying, they say the best time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. They also say there's a 100% chance of rain. So all of our clients are going to face this problem sooner or later. I don't think we've gotten to immortality yet. And they need to do the planning, and we, among others, will be there to help them. I want to take a minute and thank Mike, you for being on this program, and Dave, your input, your wisdom, your experience was most valuable to our listeners, and it was thrilled to have you on with me. Additionally, if people want to get in touch, they can email me at algibbons@algibbons.com, or I believe the number was given where they can reach us. And if they want to reach Dave or Mike, get to me and we'll forward you on to Dave and Mike to continue conversations. I want to thank Phoenix Home Life for being a sponsor. They are an outstanding life insurance company who is really into wealth management and really they do some significant studies, and they have some great advanced marketing attorneys in the company, and it's a company that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. It's a pleasure having been with you. Mike and Dave, thanks again.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of our listeners for listening. And next time, Tuesdays, 4 to 5 p.m., we'll be here, and we'll hope you'll be joining us around the country. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to 80/20 Estate Planning with your host, Al Gibbons. You can tune in to our live broadcast every Tuesday at 4 p.m. If you would like to contact Al Gibbons, you may email him at algibbons@algibbons.com or mail your questions and comments to AEG Financial Services, The Commons at Valley Forge, 1288 Valley Forge Road, number 53, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, 19460-2681. Please join us again next week.